What's up, creepers? My name's Kevin. This is Haunted by Horror, and today I'm talking about the 1992 film Candyman. At its core, Candyman acts as a gothic love story. A dilapidated apartment building in the projects acts as an effective stand-in for the more traditional setting of a gothic cathedral, with exposed beams replacing flying buttresses and graffiti replacing stained glass, complete with a makeshift altar and a giant open-mouthed portrait of Candyman taking the place of the idol of Jesus on a cross, complete with a beautiful and haunting organ-heavy score which gives Candyman an elevated religious significance long before he ever appears on screen. It is dark, gloomy, dreamlike, and atmospheric. Just like the Clive Barker short story that it's based on, Candyman does an excellent job of blending together urban legends to create a compelling new narrative. Candyman is an amalgamation of several different actual urban legends, most prominently Bloody Mary, a spirit summoned by chanting her name a certain number of times in a mirror, and The Hook, or Hookman, the story of an escaped murderer with a hook for a hand. But it also incorporates, to a lesser degree, the razor blade and the candy story, as well as the castrated boy story, which dates as far back as ancient Rome. The power of urban legends is primal. The ability to learn through instruction is a uniquely human characteristic, and urban legends exploit that characteristic. A good story is able to convey not only a narrative, but emotions. And many urban legends involve an action that the listener is warned against, thus drawing you further into the story and appealing to the innate sense of excitement and hyper-focus that we feel when facing a dangerous situation, but in a controlled and even ritualistic way. Candyman taps into this variety of morbid curiosities more effectively than most horror movies by drawing you into the story in the same manner as a real-world urban legend. Most likely you're not going to go camping at Crystal Lake or try to solve the lament configuration. However, even though you know deep down that when you say Candyman in the mirror 5 times, Tony Todd isn't going to show up to whisper in your ear in a resonant baritone as smooth as the honey from the bees that swarm around him before ultimately killing you, you might still be tempted to do it. This summoning element within the film is something that wasn't in the original story and is unique to this interpretation. And while it may be an effective marketing tool, which even led to Candyman displacing Bloody Mary in many schoolyard stories and sleepover dares, it seems that within the context of the film, it might not actually do anything. Candyman never once in the film kills someone who summoned him, aside from within the story that Helen is told in the beginning of the movie. In the story proper, Candyman kills 2 people, 1 dog, and kidnaps a baby. And only one of these murders even takes place on screen. And of the 2 people that he kills, one said his name 4 times, while the other never even said it once. And the dog almost definitely didn't summon Candyman. However, when Helen actually does say his name 5 times in the mirror, he doesn't even appear initially. It's only days later that she first sees him on the other side of a parking garage, and even then, he doesn't kill her or make any attempt to physically harm her in any way. And from what he tells her, it seems that the real reason he appeared to her wasn't because she said his name 5 times, but rather because he derives his power from the propagation of his myth.
I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing.
And she was attempting to dispel that myth.
Do I know you?
No. But you doubted me.
Fighting to save himself and the memory of the atrocities committed against him from obscurity. Though the actual strength of his myth among the residents in the housing project is questionable at best. Helen's theory, before even arriving in Cabrini-Green, is that
An entire community starts attributing the daily horrors of their lives to a mythical figure.
However, when she actually speaks with them, it seems more probable that they aren't actually that concerned with the urban legend, and that when both Anne-Marie and Jake reference the Candyman,
They ain't never gonna catch him.
Who?
Candyman. Candyman, get me.
Candyman.
They are in fact talking about the gang leader, who goes by the name Candyman, is in charge of the overlords and is almost definitely responsible for the murders of Ruthie Jean and the castration of the little boy in the bathroom. In all probability, Helen is just projecting because of her own preconceived notions about the superstitious nature of the people that live in Cabrini-Green and her own interest in the Candyman urban legend.
I hear you looking for Candyman, bitch.
The backstory in this film isn't quite as developed as it is in the later movies, though in the original short story, Candyman wasn't even given a backstory and is only described as having waxy, jaundiced skin, rouged cheeks, blue lips, eyes like rubies, long, blonde hair, a patchwork coat with trousers to match, and of course, a hook for a hand. A far cry from the tall, regal figure cast by Tony Todd in the film, aside from the hook. In the film, he is the free son of an enslaved black man who was horribly maimed and murdered by a white mob in the late 19th century for his relationship with the daughter of a wealthy white woman. And while this story was expanded upon in the movies that followed, the version presented in this movie is enough on its own to make Candyman a killer that the audience can sympathize with, in a way that you just can't with the unthinking, shark-eyed killing machine that is Michael Myers, or the unapologetic predator that is Freddy Krueger. But his backstory, while adding an interesting element to the film, makes it even more perplexing why he would choose to torment and prey upon the poor black community of Cabrini-Green rather than the rich white descendants of the people responsible for his torture and untimely death. Helen in the film mentions that 2 black people in the housing project were murdered and the police did nothing. But when she, a white woman, was attacked, they apprehended the attacker the same day. And this part of the plot actually mirrors real-life events that occurred in Chicago just a few years before Candyman was made. The story in the movie is that Ruthie Jean was murdered when intruders broke into her apartment by removing the medicine cabinet in the adjacent apartment and climbing through the wall into hers. And this was exactly how the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy occurred in real life. However, it was in Abbott Homes, an area with a much higher crime rate than Cabrini-Green, where babies had been tossed out of windows, teenagers shoved down elevator chutes, and intruders sometimes broke right through apartment walls to rape and murder tenants. Ruthie Mae McCoy called the police to report that she heard intruders attempting to break in through her bathroom wall, and 30 minutes later, someone else called to report hearing gunshots from her apartment. When police finally arrived, they knocked on her door, and when there was no answer, they left. It took 2 days before they found her body lying in a pool of blood. She had been shot 4 times, 30 minutes after having called the police. A spokesperson for the police department told a journalist who was reporting on the murder that there was no investigation into police performance on that night, nor was there a need for one. Whereas the death of Nancy Clay, a white suburban white-collar worker in a high-rise fire that same year, prompted weeks of media coverage, a city council investigation, complete with a hearing with testimony from the fire commissioner that was broadcast live on public radio, and several proposed ordinances. The performance of the police in the McCoy case didn't even merit a departmental investigation, very much like the situation in the film. There are actually several details in the movie that reflect real-life events in this way. However, they're only ever hinted at, and the movie never stops to take the time to analyze the systemic issues that were at play and led to tragic events like the murder of Ruthie Mae McCoy. It merely uses them to reinforce the idea that Helen is entering into a dangerous place. The original story was set in Liverpool, and though stark and troubling class distinctions exist within the story, the implications that come along with the history of racism and slavery in America are absent. The film attempts to incorporate these issues, but it doesn't quite manage to do so seamlessly, and therefore there are certain elements of the film that don't seem to have been properly assimilated into the story in a way that sufficiently accommodates these added themes. The choice to set the story of Candyman in Cabrini-Green is an important element to any discussion of the film. The William Green homes were built to replace the slums run by exploitative landlords with affordable, safe, and comfortable public housing. They were composed of 10 sections built over a 20-year period from 1942 to 1962. They were equipped with elevators, so residents wouldn't have to climb several flights of stairs to reach their door, and they were rented at fixed rates according to income. But what could have been a landmark in social equality was stymied by administrative disinterest and decades of racist public policies that saw the estate fall into neglect, disrepair, and hopelessness before eventually being torn down, with demolition being completed in 2011. Over time, Cabrini-Green developed the most notorious reputation in all of Chicago as the place of violence and urban decay, and came to symbolize the failure of city government in Chicago and across the nation to resolve the problems of the concentrated and isolated urban African American poor. Other public housing developments in the city were larger, poorer, and had higher rates of crime, but Cabrini-Green's reputation was more well known, due in part to its location between two of Chicago's wealthiest neighborhoods, the Gold Coast and Lincoln Park, and the fact that it was the setting for one of the most infamous publicity stunts in Chicago history. In early 1981, Mayor Jane Byrne, in a limo, with camera crews and a full police escort in tow, moved into an apartment in Cabrini-Green. Montgomery Ward donated furniture to this rich white lady to use while staying in the projects. She stayed in apartment 214 with her security detail in the apartments on either side of her. It was a mere 8 blocks from her home in the wealthy Gold Coast neighborhood, and yet worlds away. Her stay meant that many of the actual residents had to be displaced. In total, 800 residents were evicted from Cabrini-Green before Byrne moved in, under the pretense that they were suspected of harboring gang members in their apartments. Through this stunt, Byrne was attempting to demonstrate that the area wasn't as bad as its reputation would suggest. Her motives were purely political. She wanted to be seen as a reformer working against inequality, which is difficult when your city's housing projects are considered to be so unsafe as to be uninhabitable. Byrne stated that she would stay as long as it takes to clean it up. She lived in the projects part-time and moved out after 3 weeks. Mission accomplished. And it's easy to see parallels between Byrne's motivations in her exhibition and those of Helen in the film. The focus of the film seems a bit misplaced, with the primary center of attention being Helen, who acts as an outsider entering into Cabrini-Green as the spectator, one who carelessly disregards both the privacy and safety of the black people that she comes into contact with. She is on a poverty safari and views their lives as little more than an exhibition from which she can learn about the Candyman legend, so as to complete her thesis and elevate her own status by exploiting the black community, and claiming the legacy of its pain in furtherance of her own financial and academic pursuits. She intrudes into spaces where she is uninvited and unwelcomed, with little regard for the people who actually live there, or in fact, for anyone around her, and it is these very people who ultimately pay the price for her recklessness. Virginia Madsen is excellent in the role of Helen, but I just can't help but feel that the message of the film would have been better served from a protagonist with a different perspective, perhaps one of the residents within the community. However, this focus does lend itself to themes about cultural appropriation. Even as a vengeful spirit, Helen appropriates Candyman's modus operandi in the same way that she appropriates the African fetishes and tribal masks that decorate her apartment. The film, much like the legacy of slavery and racism in America, is complicated. The underlying social narrative is muddled and can be read in multiple, often contradictory ways. The interplay between Helen and Candyman is one of seduction. He whispers to her temptingly, beckoning her to come with him, to be his victim. The film, whether intentionally or not, evokes the erroneous stereotypes of overly sexual black masculinity and the purity of white femininity. The amputation of his hand can be viewed as a symbolic castration, with his hook acting as a Freudian phallic symbol with which he seeks to penetrate Helen. Candyman is the spirit of a black man who is literally hunting down and toying with a petite, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white woman. It is a dichotomy that harkens back to the very real hysteria that led to innumerable black men being lynched. Yet, the film, through its supernatural horror narrative, takes these themes to an excess that serves to deconstruct their representational function. When watching the film, it also occurs to me that it can be read in three different ways. The validity of any of these three interpretations is debatable, but I feel that each has its merits. The first is that Candyman is real, and for some reason he's trying to frame Helen, despite his whole spiel about how fear gives him power. The second is that he's somehow possessing Helen in order to carry out these acts. And the third is that Helen is mentally unstable and Candyman does not exist. However, there's one question that none of these explanations answers. During the time that Helen is institutionalized, which we find out is for an entire month, who's taking care of that baby? Is Candyman feeding and changing him during that entire period? Is Jake? And if so, why doesn't he take him back to his mom? Who's taking care of that baby? Helen does find Candyman sleeping in his sanctuary, so maybe it is him that's taking care of the baby. Do vengeful spirits need sleep? What would be Candyman's motivation for doing this? Did Candyman have a plan to sacrifice Helen and the baby on the Guy Fawkes Day bonfire, which in the film is just a random party bonfire, in order to form some sort of family unit? Perhaps he was trying to reclaim what was taken from him in some way.
You're mine now. It's time for a new miracle.
I'm clearly just speculating, but these are the kind of questions that I find myself asking while watching the film, and it would certainly explain Candyman's motivations for certain actions throughout the film that otherwise aren't very clear. Though the pace is somewhat slow throughout much of the film, with Candyman only showing up about halfway through, when Tony Todd does eventually make it on screen with his commanding theatrical presence and booming, resonant voice, he dominates the screen, and despite his limited screen time, it's very clear why he has become a horror icon. Well, that's not actually everything I have to say about Candyman, but that's all I'm going to say about Candyman for the time being. If you like this video, you can hit the little like button. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and hit the notification bell so that you'll be updated whenever I upload a new video. Alright, thanks for watching. Have a good night.